Hello and welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. I'm Anne Mwawadu. For a fourth day in a row, Russia has attacked Ukrainian food export facilities and practiced seizing ships in the Black Sea in an escalation of what Western leaders say is an attempt to wriggle out of sanctions by threatening a global food crisis. The direct attacks on Ukraine grain, a key part of the global food chain, cannot follow a vow by Kiev to defy Russia's naval blockade of its grain export ports following Moscow's withdrawal this week from a UN-brokered Safe Sea Corridor agreement. Russian missiles hit grain terminals at an agricultural enterprise in the Odessa region in southern Ukraine. Odessa's regional governor, Ole Kipa, says that 2 people have been hurt in that attack on an agricultural enterprise, but did not say where the region the enterprise was located. Reacting to Russia's attacks, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has strongly condemned Russia, warning the destruction of civilian infrastructure may constitute a violation of international humanitarian law. His spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, delivered this message at the United Nations. Well, Russia has jolted world grain markets with an escalation in the Black Sea, mounting a third straight night of airstrikes on Ukrainian ports and issuing a threat against Ukraine-bound vessels.
The Secretary General strongly condemns the Russian attacks against port facilities in Odessa and other Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea. The attacks contradict the Russian Federation's commitment under the Memorandum of Understanding with the United Nations, which states that, quote, the Russian Federation will facilitate the unimpeded export of food, sunflower oil, and fertilizers from Ukraine-controlled Black Sea ports. The Secretary General also recalls that the destruction of civilian infrastructure may constitute violations of international humanitarian law. These attacks are having an impact well beyond Ukraine. We are already seeing the negative impact on global wheat and corn prices, which hurts everyone, but especially vulnerable people in the global south. For his part, the Secretary General will not relent in his efforts to ensure that Ukrainian and Russian food and fertilizer are available on international markets as part of his ongoing efforts to fight global hunger and ensure stable food prices for consumers everywhere. We saw the Russian statement yesterday about threatening ships in the Black Sea. We saw the Ukrainian response today. All of this is taking us further away from our efforts to reopen these lanes and to get everything that we need out to market, which is Ukrainian and Russian food and fertilizer. The Secretary General will continue his efforts, but we also need to ensure that we don't see an escalation, both in actions and rhetoric. Is still waiting for that change, Mr. Guterres said.
In the meantime, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is calling for the restoration of the Black Sea Grain Initiative to meet the challenge of global food insecurity. Mr. Kuleba was speaking during a 2-day trip in Islamabad in Pakistan.
Bilateral relations and regional and multilateral issues of importance. Land corridors cannot export full amount of cereals available for export. This is the issue, which means that prices will go up because of the shortage of delivery. It is so important to make everything possible to restore Black Sea Grain Initiative, to return balance to the global food market, to return prices under control, and to give Ukraine the possibility to provide cereals to the countries who need it the most.
Since the war began, we have not concluded any agreement for defense supplies to Ukraine, keeping in view our principled, consistent and non-partisan position.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin says that what it called Ukraine's unpredictable actions poses a great danger to civilian shipping in the Black Sea and accuses Kiev of carrying out terrorist attacks in the area. Russia said this week that all ships heading to Ukraine's Black Sea ports could be considered military targets and their flag countries parties to the conflict on the Ukrainian side after it revoked their security guarantees by quitting the Black Sea grain deal. Its navy has since practiced firing rockets at floating targets and apprehending ships, although Moscow's ambassador to Washington on Thursday denied any plan to attack civilian vessels. Moscow on Monday pulled out of the year-old Black Sea grain deal aimed at facilitating the safe navigation of ships exporting grains from the Ukrainian ports during the conflict, after complaining that promises to assist its own food and fertilizer exports enshrined in a parallel memorandum had been ignored. Russian missiles have been falling on Ukrainian ports since a deal protecting the Black Sea grain export expired earlier this week, as we told you. President Putin says there will be no new deal unless Russia can secure better terms. Meanwhile, the world supply of crucial grain is at risk. And let's cross now to Berlin, where DW correspondent Rob Watts joins us now for more on this discussion. Hello, Rob, and thank you for joining us. Let's begin with how much has the situation deteriorated since the grain deal expired?
Well, they've deteriorated significantly, whatever way you look at it. As the nights have gone on, the bombings of those Ukrainian ports, like Odessa, a crucial port for the entire world, have only increased in intensity. The port hasn't seen bombings like this since the very start of the war. And the bombings have been targeted in certain ways. For example, last night, we heard that 2 grain shipment terminals were attacked in the Odessa port region, which is obviously very concerning for anyone who's worried about Ukrainian grain getting out to the world, because it's a key staple for many countries around the world. And as the bombing has increased in intensity, so has the rhetoric that we've been hearing. The Russian government appeared to issue something of a threat to civil and commercial boats in the Black Sea when it said that any boat that was heading towards Ukraine would be treated as if it was transporting weapons. And that's being interpreted as a tacit threat towards those vessels, saying that that makes them fair game for being targeted. The Americans also say that the Russians have been laying extra mines on the approaches to Ukraine's ports. So both the bombing intensity and the rhetoric are increasing, and it's getting ever more tense in the Black Sea.
And how concerned should we be? I mean, what's the impact this will have on the world's food supplies?
Well, there's a great deal of concern. That's been reflected in, for example, the price of key commodities for the world, particularly wheat. Prices around the world are now 10% higher than they were at the start of the month, and we've been seeing the highest daily increases in wheat prices since the start of the war. And that is obviously bad news for many countries that rely on Ukrainian grain. And as the UN points out, that's many of the poorest countries in the world. Many countries in Africa are heavily reliant on Ukrainian grain. But also you have other countries like China that are very reliant on Ukrainian grain, and that actually has been increasing its reliance on that. So this is very concerning for the whole world. And since that grain deal lapsed, there has been no grain leaving Ukraine, and the world is not getting the supplies that it needs.
Now, is President Putin likely to sign up to the deal once again?
Well, he said that he is willing to sign up to it again, but only when all of his conditions are met. We don't know exactly what those conditions are, but he clearly wants a better deal for Russia. He feels that the deal that's been in place for the last year was being used by the West as a political weapon against Russia, and that its exports of food were at a disadvantage, despite Russian food exports actually being exempt from international sanctions. So he's getting pressure from all kinds of quarters. The UN is putting pressure on him to sign up again. The US, as you'd expect, is putting pressure on him to sign up again. And so are those countries, many of those countries that rely on Ukrainian grain. He's going to be traveling to Turkey next month to speak to President Erdogan, and that's seen as a crucial meeting in this story because President Erdogan played a key role in the establishment of the first deal last year, and it's hoped that he may also be able to sprinkle his magic and help bring the two sides together again this time round.
All right, DW correspondent Rob Watts, thank you very much for your contribution on the world today. To other stories now, Central Intelligence Agency Director William Burns says the Wagner Group's failed mutiny has now exposed weaknesses in both President Vladimir Putin's system and Russia's strategy in Ukraine. During a conversation with NPR's Mary Louise Kelly at the Aspen Security Forum, Mr. Burns said the CIA and other intelligence agencies are now taking advantage of current disaffection in and outside the elite in Russia. He adds that Russian president is now trying to buy time while he works out a new deal with Yevgeny Prigozhin. The mutiny was the most direct assault Mr. Putin has seen in his 23 years in power, including directly challenging the Kremlin's justification for the war in Ukraine, with Mr. Prigozhin already saying it had been built on lies.
I think in many ways it exposed some of the significant weaknesses in the system that Putin has built, weaknesses that already had been laid bare by the disastrous and deeply destructive war that Putin launched 18 months ago in Ukraine. What was remarkable to me, though, was now almost exactly a month ago, today, after Prigozhin launched that mutiny, was the way in which Putin felt compelled to do a deal with his former caterer. And what was equally remarkable, if you look back at the 36 hours that preceded that deal, it began a month ago today in the morning, Russian time, with a 30-minute video that Yevgeny Prigozhin put on Telegram, which is a channel that probably more than a third of the Russian population is active on. And that video was the most scathing indictment of Putin's rationale for war, of the conduct of the war, of the corruption at the core of Putin's regime that I've heard from a Russian or a non-Russian. The truth is there's a lot of disaffection in Russia, in the elite and outside it in Russia right now, and we're not wasting the opportunity as an intelligence service to try to take advantage of it.
And still at the Aspen Security Forum, CIA Director Mr. Burns spoke about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, reinforcing China's doubts regarding a potential incursion into Taiwan. He reflected on the order of Chinese President Xi Jinping to be prepared to invade Taiwan by 2027, saying that Mr. Putin's experience gives pause to China's leadership. Mr. Burns had previously said the United States knew as a matter of intelligence that Mr. Xi had ordered his military to be ready to conduct an invasion of self-governed Taiwan by the year 2027. According to Mr. Burns, the Ukrainian case exemplifies how a smaller military has had incredible success in fighting back and also made evident some flaws in Russian weapons systems.
You know, it's been discussed publicly a lot that instruction to be ready by 2027. I think it means just that, to be ready. It doesn't mean that conflict is imminent or inevitable.
Has he made up his mind, one way or the other?
I'm not sure that he has. And I think what it means is that today, President Xi and the PLA, the People's Liberation Army leadership, have doubts about whether they could pull off a successful, full-scale invasion of Taiwan at acceptable cost to them. And I think, you know, no foreign leader, I think, has paid more careful attention to Putin's experience in Ukraine than President Xi has as he thinks about Taiwan. And I think that's probably reinforced some of those doubts, too. Not only the way in which an objectively smaller military has had incredible success in fighting back with a great deal of motivation against a bigger military, but also some of the flaws in Russian weapon systems. The fact that I think certainly Putin, but I think also President Xi underestimated the speed with which President Biden would be able to put together a strong coalition in support of Ukraine, the solidarity of the West in being willing to accept some economic costs to inflict damage on Russia. So all of that, I think, you know, gives pause to the Chinese leadership.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Friday that the West is stoking the flames of war by supporting Ukraine in its conflict with Russia. Mr. Putin was making televised remarks to members of the Security Council at the start of an online meeting. He added that Western weapons supplied to Ukraine burn well on the battlefield, even as the U.S. has now confirmed that Ukraine has started using its cluster munitions. The European Union will be providing up to €5 billion a year for the next 4 years for Ukraine's defense needs. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, made this known, adding that this will be via the means of a dedicated section under the European Peace Facility. Mr. Borrell also said the European Union's relationship with Turkey goes both ways.
We propose the creation of a dedicated section under the European Peace Facility to provide up to €5 billion a year for the next 4 years for the defense needs of Ukraine. There's in 2 ways.
This week, Russia has launched nearly 70 missiles into Ukraine, as well as almost 90 Iranian-made drone loitering munitions. That's according to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who says that Russia carried out missile and drone strikes in southern and eastern Ukraine, causing damage to infrastructure in the Black Sea port of Odessa. That happened earlier this week. The attacks followed a pledge of retaliation by Russia after a blast on a bridge linking Russia to the Crimean Peninsula on Monday. Moscow has now accused Ukraine of attacking that bridge, which is used to transport military supplies to Crimea. Zelensky also said that he has proposed some changes to Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal.
Тільки за 4 дні цього тижня, з понеділка, російські терористи вже застосували проти нашої держави.
The first is to find extra budgetary resources for projects that are really necessary. Second, I asked the Prime Minister to consider replacing the Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine, Oleksandr Takshenko. Everyone understands what we are talking about. Cobblestone streets, city decorations and fountains can wait. Victory goes first.
Ми максимально активно працюємо з партнерами заради додаткових комплексів ППО.
Speaking to changes, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has sacked his country's ambassador to the United Kingdom. Vadim Pristakio also recently criticized the president's response to a row over gratitude for British military aid. He had called Mr. Zelensky's promise to thank the UK Defence Minister every morning unhealthy sarcasm. Well, Kyiv gave no official reason for the dismissal, but confirmed that Mr. Pristakio was no longer ambassador.
Very good.
Let's have Anna Chernikova. She's VOA correspondent. She joins us now for more on this. Hello, Anna, and it's good to see you.
Good evening.
All right, so let's begin with Odessa. I mean, that area is the first attack in a row already. What are authorities doing to really protect the facility, which is, of course, crucial for global food security at this moment?
Yeah, this week Odessa is the main target for Russia and Russian missiles and drones. And we can see that the main target in Odessa and in Odessa region are agricultural facilities and enterprises, and already a lot of wheat, a lot of other cultures have been destroyed. The storages, enormous amount of tons of these cultures have already been destroyed due to these attacks. And definitely, we should not forget that all these attacks are also, unfortunately, targeting residential areas as well, because all the debris and all the debris basically go to the residential areas, and some missiles and drones also hit residential areas. In terms of what Ukrainian government is doing, there are a lot of talks about additional air defense in that area, and President Zelensky was talking a lot about that with international allies as well. Also, today, President Zelensky had general staff meeting with the head of Ukrainian army, as well as the head of Ukrainian Navy and Ukrainian Minister of Infrastructure. What he said that he gave the special task for all this, for everyone, in order to make sure that this grain corridor could continue and could be safe. So there would be certain actions. Of course, he did not give additional details, but certain actions are discussed in order to continue this corridor. And also, he gave the same task to the diplomatic representatives and heads of diplomatic missions of Ukraine.
How are villagers of Odessa coping with this barrage of attacks? At least 3 people, as we know, were killed and several others were wounded.
Well, sorry. Well, I think that it's almost, well, it's year and a half. We can say almost year and a half of this invasion, this active full-scale invasion phase, and of course we cannot. We cannot say that people, it's the first time that people experience this, but definitely such intensity of attacks is something new for Odessa and Odessa region, at least if we talk about missile and drone attacks, which are happening over the night again and again. And I can just say that this looks very similar to what was happening to the city of Kyiv for the whole month of May. Well, people continue to live. I can put it this way: people wake up every morning. People go to their work, to their jobs. The people do things in order to continue, in order to make sure that the city is running, the city is living, and all the services are making sure that the debris, the rubbles are are gone from the city. But of course, situation is very difficult. Of course, it's difficult. It's not only physically difficult, but also psychologically difficult for people. But again, people just continue to live as much as they can.
Well, we understand that President Volodymyr Zelensky has sacked his country's ambassador to the United Kingdom. Give us details on what you know about this.
Well, for the moment, we just can say that the ambassador, Ukrainian ambassador to the UK was fired, basically, and we don't know yet if he's gonna be moved to some other country or maybe moved to other position. So we don't have any information on that yet, and we don't really have much details. But what we can really discuss that it was an incident happening at the NATO summit, and Mr. Pristaiko, the ambassador, Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, made a comment about sarcasm, which should not be used by President Zelensky, and well, everyone here inside the country discussed this, that this might be the reason, that because President Zelensky is quite a strict person in his ruling, and this is a known fact, and probably he didn't like that comment. But again, we don't know for sure, and we cannot say for sure if this was the main reason. But again, this incident that happened during this NATO summit was, well, basically leaded to this announcement that the ambassador is fired. So we will see what's going to happen to Mr. Pristaiko's well, professional career next. But yeah, apparently we're waiting for the new ambassador to be announced.
All right, thank you very much, VOA Anna Chernikova. Thank you for your contribution always on The World Today.
Thank you.